much of the regulation in these regulated professions is about educating and informing the customer or the client about the risk and the steps they can take to mitigate those risks. So I think the better we communicate those risks, the better that they can be at minimizing the impact.
Matthew, you are head of brand, content and PR at LexisNexis. Today we're talking about marketing and risk, or marketing around risk. Can you briefly tell us who you are, how you came to LexisNexis, your professional journey?
Sure. Well, it's quite a bit of a mouthful, my job title. I must admit, I don't usually use it for exactly the reason that you've just demonstrated. Essentially, my job is top of funnel. I specialize in top of funnel engagement. So be that looking after brand, advertising, corporate affairs, communication, social media, whatever it is, it's about shaping and creating interest in a brand or a set of products or service. My career's been quite varied. I started off in B2C. I worked at British Gas, driving the brand and corporate affairs activities for British Gas and Centrica Group, their parent. I then moved into the world of B2B, looking into the aviation industry, of all places. As a commercial marketing director for an SMB there, I oversaw the shift of the business from manufacturing design into a more collaborative aviation passenger experience type agency. From there, I then moved into a huge US tech company, RingCentral, who specialized in unified communications, call center software, essentially all the tool underlying many, many businesses. And the challenge for them was that the brand had really focused into the SME market, and they wanted to understandably play in the enterprise market. And the challenge was, how do we change the brand positioning, the messaging, the communications in order to fight against the big players in the market, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Ciscos. So a really interesting challenge. And then that led me into the world of LexisNexis. We essentially create products, software that's based on legal content and legal intelligence to enable lawyers and legal practitioners to be able to deliver their work more effectively and efficiently. And part of my challenge here is we are a huge content powerhouse. We create and curate huge amounts of legal content, but we have now positioned and pivoted into being a tech company producing brilliant innovations and technology for the legal market. So how do we shift the brand in a way that retains the heritage and retains the trust and the value of that content, but really aligns itself for the future and our future products?
I was looking at LexisNexis's website, and they are, as you say, a powerhouse for content. The quality is extremely high, and there's a lot of output there as well. In that output, I imagine you deal with a lot of topics around risk. I imagine you have done at RingCentral as well, and possibly in aviation. Why is communicating around risk so crucial in marketing, and perhaps one of those lines that's more difficult to walk?
So this is a big old topic, and I think there are lots of different angles, as you and I previously discussed, lots of different ways to look at this. So let's just break it down step by step. So the first type of communication around risk is about the need to tell a customer that there is a risk to the activity or the work that they're about to do. So for example, if you're planning to buy into an investment fund, or you're speaking to your wealth manager about where you might want to invest your pension or your money, they're going to have to warn you that it goes up and down. They're going to have to let you know that you're investing at a high risk, low risk, medium risk. They're going to have to shape and steer your understanding of the risk that you're about to expose yourself to. Even when you go on holiday and you haven't purchased travel insurance through your holiday journey, they're going to educate you and let you know that that is on your head. They are advising you about the level of risk that you're about to bite off. So it's really important to explain that level of risk to a customer. And quite often this is sort of operational comms rather than perhaps marketing, or indeed certainly in professional services, it's more about providing a formal message that supports an offline communication, if you like. And in many cases, this is a bit of an obligation. They are clearly required to communicate the risk, and this helps to build up and communicate brand trust. You might lose a sale along the way here and there as you talk up and you're being upfront about those risks. But being transparent and sharing about these risks, it is a key tenet to driving brand loyalty. So have you ever come across a brand that says, yeah, we don't care about trust? Trust isn't one of our key objectives and that we're trying to deliver. And I don't think many brands say that or think that. The second element in this is about when a customer's job or their work or whatever they're doing has an element of risk. And what we want to do is communicate or market that we have a product or a solution that might help them to manage that risk. So this is sort of definitely marketing based on insight. For me, this is the one that I think is of most interest, and I find it's really interesting. It could be something as simple as, if you're selling, I don't know if you just heard the plinky plonky there. That was because I've just got some virus software that's just popped up telling me it's doing its regular monitoring. It's like, oh great, thank you very much. But it's quite as simple as antivirus software is about identifying a risk, and it's then helping to solve, and you'd mark it based on the risk that's presented. But of course, it could just be something as simple as a manual task, the requirement to wear safety goggles, or to wear the right level of safety clothing, or to upgrade your tools to the latest versions that are safest. And we can't forget the world of law, clearly one that I know intimately now. The law and practicing the law is about risk. So what are the risks to an in-house counsel, for example, of not adequately seeking external counsel for advice and guidance? Or what is the risk of not completing that pile of work that they ought to be completing because they haven't got the time or the budget or the resource? And for those that work in legal firms, it might be about the risk of not having the most up-to-date legal content, so that the advice and guidance that they give their clients is at risk of being out of date or being inaccurate. And obviously a huge risk for law firms is then about the risk of getting something wrong and then giving the wrong advice, which of course not only leads to personal reputational damage to the partner or the solicitor that's been working on it, can lead to brand reputational damage for the firm itself. It can harm profits, and it can lead to indemnity claims, which then knocks cash flow in the future, etc., etc. So there's a huge amount that we can wrap up into this. Even things like, don't miss an opportunity to have a sale. It's one of the risks we used to talk about selling unified communications. Do you want every single device you own to ring when a customer's contacting you? You never want to miss that opportunity to get the sale. So these are about finding the insight and then creating the risk conversation around those. Thirdly, and sort of similarly, I think probably to that first point, is about the risk that I, as the expert, am about to be exposed to through my job. And in order to mitigate that risk, I have to explain that risk to you so that you're informed and you can make an informed decision about what you want to do. Again, more likely to be a reactive operational comm rather than necessarily marketing, but along the lines of, go back to our lawyer example, a lawyer wanting to clarify that what they're about to say is just guidance and you need to review it. You're the individual, you're the one who's taking the decision. I'm giving you the guidance and direction, or just as you would if you speak to a wealth manager or your bank manager. They will let you know that what they're saying is it is just advice. You need to make your own decisions based on the information available to you. And just recently I was having to do my car insurance, and when you speak to them, they say, I can only tell you the facts. I cannot give you advice. I cannot give you guidance. So there's a huge risk around this, that actually you might undermine the core product that you're trying to sell or that the customer's trying to purchase. Yet it's really important that liability is crystal clear in the mind of the customer. So getting the tone of these messages spot on is critical. If it's too hidden, this is something we used to have in the British Gas world, and when we produced bills, that if you provided too much detail in the bills, people would be concerned that you were trying to hide something and bamboozle them with data. Trying to simplify it right down, people were worried that you're trying to hide something because you weren't giving them all the information. So getting that tone right, getting that level right, and it is really important. Make it too hidden and it could look like you're trying to sneak it out as a disclaimer. Make it too central and it could just be sort of slopey shoulder territory that you're trying to get it off your plate. And again, you sort of already talked about it, is in relation to regulated professions. So communicating around risk is really important for those in those industries. And much of the regulation in these regulated professions is about educating and informing the customer or the client about the risk and the steps they can take to mitigate those risks. So it's about informing people on choices. And I think the better we communicate those risks, then the better that they can be at minimizing the impact of those risks on them. So quite a long rambling answer, but I think there are so many different elements of this. We need to break it all apart.
No, that's very clear. I think it's interesting how risk does run through everything you do, especially in regulated sectors. And it's very hard in those regulated sectors to separate operational from marketing messaging around risks. But I think sometimes those things can be at odds. When that happens, you can, and brands do, sometimes veer in the way of fear mongering when they want to press the risk. How do you balance fear mongering and transparency when it comes to those risks?
Yeah, so another meteor topic. Context is critical. Offering and explaining the context for the risk is vital. So what are the circumstances under which those risks might occur or arise? How might they relate to the product or the service that you're offering? And I think that helps to present the risk as part of the broader platter, the broader strategy, rather than just that specific isolated threat. And I think this can help customers to understand what's manageable, what's expected, rather than it necessarily being inevitable. I think certainly as a marketeer, it's really important to educate rather than alarm. And if you want to do real insight-led marketing, sometimes alarming is what you want to do. But I think actually it's making sure we get a balance so that we're educating our audience about the risks and about their implications. We're providing information on how they can make informed decisions around that. Potentially, my product is the solution to this risk. But I think what we should be avoiding is the sort of sensationalist language or the alarmist tactics. Some newspapers come to mind about how you can alarm rather than educate. And I think that's probably what I want. What you don't really want to do is create fear or anxiety. Right. And I think that's what I'm defining here, perhaps as alarm. And the power is to educate. And I think building on educating, we then need to make sure we're providing the solution to that problem. So what are the strategies? What are the safeguards? What are the processes? Look, my product or service is the solution, or at least can help contribute and mitigate some of this potential risk, perhaps depending on the type of product or service you offer, emphasizing the expertise that will help clients, your customers, to navigate around those risks. So we got to balance risk with benefit, and we got to talk about, okay, what are the benefits of our product or services alongside the risks in the market, and show how the solutions can outweigh those challenges and reassure clients to it. Something that I don't do enough, if I'm honest, is about using data and about supporting discussions around risk with proof points and with case studies and with numbers to evidence what the actual likelihood is or what the impact might be, and then of course what the benefit of the solution would be. And I think this then adds credibility to the marketing, to the message, and possibly, hopefully, just manages some of those concerns. And then finally, I'd say, as I've touched upon already, it's about tone. If we get a good, balanced, professional tone in our materials, then that can only help. The tone of voice for a brand exists for a reason. So using exaggerated language, I appreciate I'm probably failing on this point as we're on this call at the moment, but avoiding exaggeration or hyperbole or overly negative statements that might unnecessarily induce fear or anxiety is really important. And a big role for marketeers is how can we craft that messaging to convey the story and the opportunity and the ability to manage the risk.
It's difficult in the case that you have to craft that story without data, without being able to put quantifiables on the risks. You have to tell the story because you know there's a risk and you know you need to speak to that pain. But the language that you use, you've got to be incredibly careful with. And you might have, say, your sales department on one side going, we need to make this more alarmist. And you might have your compliance team on the other side saying, no, we need to be very, very careful about the language we use and be very light touch. Have you found yourself in those situations?
Oh, absolutely. And I think all marketeers will know, I mean, regardless of the tone, everyone can do marketing, everyone can write comms, and that then causes the problem for those that actually do have to write the comms and do actually have to do the marketing, is that it's not quite as simple perhaps as it might be perceived. And I'm sure everyone has experienced the problem where an opinion is helpful to feed in but shouldn't necessarily be a decision. And to answer your question directly, have I experienced this yet? Yeah, absolutely. I once got an email via our customer services team who said that my marketing message, one of the emails I sent out about a key risk, was too close to the bone, right? It was alarmist. It had added to their mental burden, And they were really unhappy. Now, clearly, no one ever wants to do that to another human, no question. However, it was clear that the topic, therefore, was right. If I touched on a nerve, then it meant that we were pushing in the right direction. And perhaps my reflection was, maybe I needed to change the tone of the message. Maybe I needed to reflect on how it was presented. Maybe we need to think about how we could, get the balance between the risk and the solution so that we were hopefully not adding to that mental burden. I needless to say, I obviously did apologize to the customer about it. It was just one customer, incidentally. But I think emphasizing the risk of not using a product is a very powerful tool. It's generally a tool that's very popular from general managers and from salespeople. We need to articulate the risk of not buying our product. And in my experience, I think these can work, but actually a more blended approach is needed that not just talks about the risk of not using your product, but also talks about the benefit of using the product. And I think merely going down one route rather than the other doesn't necessarily create that full-rounded campaign that might have the greatest impact.
Yeah, ultimately, it's about taking care more than anything. You have to kind of walk the line and push the edges to learn. That's the only way that you learn what your audience respond to and what speaks to their pain points and the frictions that they're experiencing. I think in a brand like yours, it must be very difficult. The messaging has evolved over so many years that you've got to make sure that everything you do is in line with a history of touch with risk. In terms of things like ChatGPT, how do technologies like these and other technologies, perhaps like machine learning, how can they help us market around risk and what are the dangers?
So I think that firstly, obviously, there is a whole new suite of risks on the horizon that almost no matter what your market sector is, there are just so many risks now coming in that have never been talked about, have never really been explored. Some are really easy to understand, some are not. Some are technical, some are not. Some impact today, some are not going to impact for ages. But strategically and theoretically, there is so much new, interesting avenues of conversation and exploration that as a content specialist, the opportunity for comms and doing engagement around these it feels endless. And one of the challenges you often ask yourself when you're sitting looking at your blank sheet of paper is, how do I say something new on this topic? And whilst we are hearing an awful lot about AI and large language models, et cetera, actually there are so many unanswered questions. There's so much rich content ready to go that it does feel seemingly endless in terms of what we can start to pull together. I'm really personally excited about the role of personalized communications. And I think it's to be able to really understand a customer segment and then make that customer segment smaller and smaller and tighter is really powerful. Now, you could argue that with the right level of customer data that you might have gathered from phone calls or from trawling the internet or from your CRM databases, etc., AI could well pull out a risk insight that is so sharp and so relevant specifically for one client. And so firstly, that's exceptionally powerful. Imagine the ability to do marketing about the exact problem that your extractive AI has been able to predict is going to be the problem. However, that then is quite scary. It's almost intrusive. Maybe you identified a problem through your data that your client hasn't even realized yet. Or perhaps you're crossing that line between what you as a supplier should be talking about and should know into the information that might be deemed as being owned by that particular client. So I think, as I say, there's so much thought that can be going into this as to what it means. But ultimately, whatever happens, the more personalized the communication, the more relevant it is to that individual, that company, that industry, the sharper the insight, the more impactful the comms will be. And then, of course, from that, we've got all sorts of brilliant uses of generative AI in terms of automated comms and thought leadership on specific problems. So again, back to that, if I've identified a proper problem that's relevant to one of my clients, well, I can then generate really specific thought leadership that talks specifically to their problem or taps into my 12 or 15 interesting reports and data insight to provide something that's completely bespoke to them. So it's highly relevant and highly engaging. I think that's That's really, really interesting. And then the final alarm bell in my mind, I mean, I'm not final, I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but the alarm bell in my mind is about data security and about the role of cybersecurity. Now, with GDPR and all the other regulations that come along, and as technology has progressed, it has always been a risk, but now I feel it's moving into super risk territory. Likewise with the understanding of IP, the ownership of IP, copyrights, etc., a whole new Pandora's box of opportunity, but risk and challenge has been opened. And I think we need to make sure that if we're going to utilize the example I've given there about, finding insights, is the data that this is looked at our data? Are we allowed to have done this? Are we extracting? Is it going to be protected from not sharing something with another client as appropriate? And these are all really big topics. I know everyone is in most people's minds, but are both very exciting, but very, very, very risky in terms of it potentially going wrong. Certainly at this early stage where the technology isn't quite proven to most people's confidence just yet.
It speaks to what you said earlier about context. The same questions exist. It just introduces that new variable and the potential for things to go wrong if you don't have that handle on it, and if you're not taking care to ensure that you're in line with regulatory guidance and in line with customer expectations and your promise as a company. This has been really interesting, Matthew, and we talk for hours. What's one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
So I think I would tell myself to do what you enjoy and find fulfillment in your work. Yeah, balance and happiness, I think, are far more important than anything else.
I think that's great advice. Definitely one that my younger self could have taken. Thank you for taking the time. I'm sure our audience will find it incredibly interesting. So cheers, Matthew.
No trouble.